All right, guys, I just want to welcome back to the Everything Cultural Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we're doing our 2024 preview and prediction for the SMU Mustangs, coming off another 10-win season, only their second one since 1984, winning the AAC, now moving to the ACC of Rhett Lashley in his third year as head coach, Rob Likens and Casey Woods, the offensive play callers, Scott Simon's third year as defensive play caller. Look at the SMU offense unit. It was phenomenal last year. They had nice balance. They were able to score points. And they also have a lot of versatility in terms of the players that produce for them. This is a team that's incredibly deep, Nick. And, of course, you want to start with Preston Stone, one of 8 starters back for this offense. Doesn't have the greatest arm strength. He's an athletic player with great vision, has the ability to throttle it in the tight windows. Nice, quick decision maker as well. Guy's coming off a very good season where he had 3,200 yards, 28 touchdowns, only 6 picks. And this offense was so good, mainly the defense, I guess you could say, that Kevin Jennings, redshirt freshman last year, started against Tulane in the conference title game, played an all right performance. They were able to still win by double figures, so they were able to get some solid play from him. Rhett Lashley, a lot of people forget that he's a heck of an offensive coach, Nick. Obviously, he was at Miami previously. He's gotten a couple of Hurricane players to come join his program out here in Dallas. What do you make of what Preston Stone can do this season in a new conference where the offense did struggle against the likes of Oklahoma and TCU early on in the year?
Rhett Lashley's a fantastic head coach. He's got a great offense that returns a lot of pieces, starting with his centerpiece, the quarterback Preston Stone. Sure, the completion percentage at 59 is not phenomenal. I think he needs to work on that accuracy. That's certainly a concern, and that's something that you and I both feel is that the accuracy does need to be figured out. But I think Stone is still a quarterback that can be very successful for this team this year. 3,200 yards passing last year, 28 touchdowns to 6 picks is a really solid ratio. Also can be involved in the running game a small amount. He had about 200 yards rushing and 4 scores. So he can be a bit of a red zone threat. They have Kevin Jennings behind him, who I think was serviceable during that appearance against Tulane. I think Stone is ready to go and lead this team in the new conference. I like what Rhett Lashley's doing. I think he's drawn up a really solid offensive playbook. And I think Stone, leading the way for this team is a good, reliable quarterback as they enter the new conference.
Now you look at the running back room, 2 Miami Hurricanes in this one. Brashad Smith comes over. Jalen Knighton last year was their top rusher. Versatile player. He's athletic in space, seems best at running between the tackles. LJ Johnson had 300-plus yard games last season. He's a bigger back at 211. Showcased much better ball security than Knighton as well. And then Shamar Wheaton also had 400-plus yards last year. Incredibly deep backfield, Nick. They're getting, again, back the top 4 rushers, and they even add another piece there that can maybe provide some versatility to them. What do you think is going to be the expectation for this backfield? About 176 yards per game last year on the ground. Had great efficiency. Production was spread across all 3 of these guys. I mean, it's hard to have this many guys put up these kind of numbers. SMU did it last year with the slashing ground game.
I think the production will be similar, if not better. I think this is a very strong running back room that returns a lot of pieces, plus adding a very underrated add in Smith. Further down the depth chart, Knighton, I think, is a phenomenal back, underrated player. Really nice speed, nice cutting ability, good footwork, good field vision as well. 745 yards rushing, 5.5 yards per carry, and 7 touchdowns. Plus, he had 13 grabs out of the backfield, including a touchdown. LJ Johnson, 576, 5.3 yards per carry, and 4 scores. Good numbers there. And then Wheaton, it was a good number 3 in this offense, 410 yards, 4.9 yards per carry, and 5 scores. Kind of saw him in the red zone occasionally. A good backfield, a great backfield with some really nice players. They were solid last year. 175 yards per game is not bad at all. I think they can get close to 200 this year with what they return.
Now you look at the wide receiver room that's also incredibly deep. They get back their top 6 pass catchers. Jake Bailey was the top receiver out of the slot. Had no touchdowns, though. Tight end R.J. Maryland is right behind him in yards, but had 7 scores, which ties him with Jordan Hudson for the most on the team. Hudson, 6'1", 192, showcasing great hands as an outside pass catcher. Moochie Dixon was a quality rotational piece as an outside receiver as well. Romello Brinson had 428 yards. Keyshawn Smith and Roderick Daniels had a combined 49 receptions. Very deep room here. They certainly spread the wealth to a large extent. I know Preston Stone said, like a month or so ago, that he thinks that they have the best receiving core in the conference, and a lot of people clowned him for it. And it's just because they don't know SMU football, so I can't really fault them too much. But he's not exactly wrong, Nick. They don't exactly have high-end talents by any means, but this is an incredibly deep room. They certainly do a great job of spreading the ball around to. Smith being another one of those Miami Hurricanes. So there's a great formula going on here. The amount of production they have returning at the supporting cast is ungodly. It's absurd. What do you think's the expectation here? And do you think they rank towards the top of the conference in terms of skill?
I do think they rank towards top of the conference in skill. They have a really good room here with some really strong pieces across the board. Jake Bailey, 528 yards receiving, 12.6 yards per grab. RJ Maryland at tight end is a really good red zone threat for this team. He had 7 touchdowns, 15.2 yards per grab, 518 yards receiving. Kevontae Dixon, 441 yards receiving, 17.64 touchdowns for him. Brinson as well, 431, 15.4, 2 scores. Jordan Hudson had 7 scores, 425 yards receiving, 14.2. Keyshawn Smith is a really solid piece who had 3 touchdowns, 15.7 yards per grab, 392 yards receiving. And then Roderick Daniels had 370 yards receiving, 4 touchdowns, 15.4. All very productive, double-digit yards per grab here. Really good touchdown numbers as well. This is a very deep wide receiver room, a very deep offense that returns a ton of talent. And they were scoring 38 points per game. They can certainly score that much and potentially more again this year.
And they look at the offensive line. P.J. Williams will take over our left tackle. He was solid in his 400 snaps during his freshman season. They get a star at left guard back in Logan Parr. Justin Osborne was tremendous, playing 300-plus snaps each at both positions on the right side. Will likely be the starting center this season, though. Right guard, we'll see Ja'Kai Clark, who saw 130 snaps last year. Savion Byrd transfers in from Oklahoma, not being all that impressive in his 350 snaps. And this was a year that really dominated their conference a season ago, Nick, and obviously you're coming to a conference now that has very impressive defenses. A lot of them on the D-line are deep, they're nasty, and you lose a guy like Branson Hickman at center, he departs. A guy like Ben Sparks is also gone, and then you have Hiron White, who was really good at right tackle. They're not going to be able to, have the same efficiency they had a season ago. These guys are going to have to continue to be good, but they're going to have to be stronger. Durability can maybe creep into the question. Overall health of how they can manage against these tougher, more physical groups is certainly something you wonder when you switch conferences, and I think that's a bit of a concern maybe we should discuss.
I think it is certainly a concern. I do agree that there is some potential to worry about that. They will be playing, tougher competition this year, certainly compared to when they were in the AAC last year. And they didn't fare well against Boston College in their bowl game last year. They lost that game at Fenway. So that certainly is a comparison there, because that's a team that's in this conference that they're joining, and they lost to the Boston College Eagles. They also struggled against some of the bigger, teams they played in their schedule last year, like Oklahoma. So I think the offensive line is part of that problem. I think, Savion Byrd, who is added from Oklahoma at right tackle, can be solid for this team. I think Clark and Osborne on that right side for Clark, and then Osborne at center is a solid piece. Logan Parr, a nice graduate senior. P.J. Williams worries me as a bit of an inexperienced player at left tackle who could be a weak spot for this team. I think this SMU offensive line is probably the weakest part of this offense, but I still think it's a really solid unit. They made some good adds, primarily in Byrd, who I think was a really solid add from Oklahoma, and plugs into that line pretty perfectly.
Looking at the verdict for this unit, Mustangs return an incredibly deep supporting cast of a good veteran quarterback and some solid players on that offensive line. Issue is this team is now boosting its competition severely, and they're in for a rude awakening as they played poor versus the 2 Power 5 opponents in the regular season. They were bad in the bowl game. I know the weather did play a bit of a part in that one. I didn't watch the full game, Nick. I know you can expand on that here in a second. But when they played, and those games were early on in September against OU and TCU. I do want to specify that. And they did have, over 400 against the Frogs. Only 367, though, against Oklahoma. Couldn't really run the ball. They couldn't score against the TCU. So it wasn't exactly bad. They weren't exactly stonewalled, but it certainly wasn't a pretty performance. And then, of course, Nick, what happened against Boston College?
Yeah, the weather was pretty poor up in Boston. I was at that game. I enjoyed my time at Fenway. The field certainly plays a role. The weather, the combination of playing on a baseball field that had artificial grass laid over the infield, the design of the way they lay the field out at Fenway is quite interesting compared to how they play at other baseball stadiums like Petco Park in San Diego or Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. The field at Fenway was designed a little bit different to fit into the unique dimensions of that historic baseball stadium. So a lot of the infield was on the playing field of the football field, and that got severely damaged throughout the game as it just rained and made it very muddy, tough to play on. And they had a tough time throwing the ball. Stone was really uncomfortable, it looked like, and the quarterback play was not great in that bowl game. In general, the offense kind of sputtered. They also got unlucky with a couple special teams miscues that Boston College took advantage of in front of a really pro Boston College crowd that was there. It was slightly concerning and definitely caught my eye a little bit because I think it was an eye-opening thing to see that offense struggle in that game. But I do think it was more of a one-off due to bowl game late in the season. The weather was not phenomenal. Certain things of that nature played a big impact in that game, in my opinion.
And quick refresher, Kevin Jennings was a starter in the bowl game. He didn't play very well in that one. But nonetheless, like you said, the weather did play a factor in that. He didn't play good at all. Just something to mention. Certainly moving on, they should do better, I think, against these newfound Power 5 opponents this year. Looking at the defensive side of the ball, for years I'd do an SMU preview, and one thing I would say is this defense is going to be better this year. And I said that for 2 or 3 years straight, it seemed, and they finally lit a fire in this defense this past season where they were elite level. I mean, that bowl game, not the bowl game, the conference title game, for example, where they had a backup quarterback and they just pitched a shutout, basically, it felt like. They returned 6 starters. They had the second most sacks in FBS, getting back an elite defensive end in Elijah Roberts, who was great versus the run, was one of the nation's top sack getters. Amari Abor, who didn't play at Ohio State, will back him up. David Abaraya only played a few snaps. Isaiah Smith anchors the band position. Was quite solid last year, especially against the run. Cam Robertson had very similar numbers and about 70 more snaps. Jafari Harvey transfers in from Miami to help up, what is a really good edge group, I would say. Interior D-line starts with Corey Robertson. Wasn't all that great at 6'3", 268. Lots of transfers around him. Anthony Booker, a 6-year guy who spent most of his time at Maryland, is a 350-pounder who's been pretty quality at stopping the run. Jonathan Jefferson only played 100 more snaps, and only 100 snaps total, that is, in 3 years at Georgia. Figures to be a big help at 295. Mike Lockhart was a respectable player at West Virginia. Jared Burris and then Jared Harrison-Hunte, who was always a quality player at Miami, joins the fold. Very deep defensive line here, Nick. I know that's a lot of talking points, but for a team like the Mustangs, who does come from the group of 5 up to the ACC, to have this much depth and skill at the defensive line, another one of those things that I noticed year after year, they kept getting better at. Pretty impressive what they have here.
This is a very strong defense. I do want to just cap off, Kevin Jennings was the quarterback for SMU. I forgot that he was playing in that game. He had an okay day at times. And the defense was strong against BC. That was a low-scoring game. I think the defense was holding up for the most part. Castellanos didn't have an incredible day passing the ball. Really, he picked up most of his yardage on the ground when he won MVP of that game. And this defense, I think, was a very underrated defense that people were not talking about enough last year. And it starts with this, shockingly deep defensive line that they returned this year that's going to make this team much better. Elijah Roberts is a really solid piece that returns with double-digit tackle for loss and sack figures, 37 total tackles, 12.5 tackles for loss, 10 sacks, 3 pass breakups, really good numbers from him. Corey Roberson as well is a really solid piece they bring back. He had 29 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, plus a pick, which returned for a touchdown, so solid numbers from him. I think they added a good piece in Anthony Booker out of the portal. He's a guy that you could really find a lot out of. I think he's a good player to add. Isaiah Smith's not bad either, 26 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. Good numbers from him as well. I like what they have in this system. Cameron Robertson, further down the depth chart as well. He had, 5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, and 19 total tackles, a rotational piece, so productive in his limited snaps. I do like what this defensive has. It has transfers, has veteran players that have been around SMU for a while. A really nice combo here.
You look at the middle of this defense, they returned the top tackler, and Kobe Wilson. He was good versus the run. Very efficient player. Didn't make any negative plays, really, though. Ahmad Walker was even better against the run. 5'11", 288. Some interesting size there. Was the second leading tackler. Alexander Kilgore wasn't all that bad in his 300 snaps as a true freshman. Justin Medlock, who didn't play much in his 2 years at Utah, arrives. Pretty good room here, though, nonetheless. Nick, I like what they have at linebacker, backing up a very sound defensive line. Did want to mention, since we're going to talk about the offense against those Power 5 teams, the defense was good, not great. They did give up 190 rushing yards on average in those 2 contests, and in the Boston College game, they gave up 262 in. So the defense certainly had its flaws against the tougher competition, but with another year of experience under their belt, with what they're getting back, and I can certainly think it's an area where they can vastly improve on, but something we also want to be a bit concerned with.
Both linebackers are the top 2 returning tacklers for this team. Wilson did 80 total tackles, 3 tackles for loss, a sack for him, plus a pick. Good numbers. Ahmed Walker returns as well. He was solid, 65 total tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack. Alex Kilgore was really good in rotational reps as a true freshman last year. Want to see what he can do this year and maybe potentially expand the role. 36 total tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, plus a pick. I like what they have here. This is a very good linebacking unit led by 2 solid players in Wilson and Walker.
Now you move to the secondary. Some turnover here at quarterback. Jahari Rogers wasn't all that good in his 300 snaps. Other projected starter, A.J. Davis, barely saw any time last season. Deuce Harmon, though, comes over from Texas A&M, figures to see lots of time, seeing 400 snaps last year. He's a pretty average player for A&M. Cale Sanders was very good in his role of the slot, though. Jaden Miller-Jones behind him, played 200 snaps. Safety group returns both starters and Jonathan McGill, Isaiah Nwagbia, the latter being more elite, as he was great in coverage and also had 4 interceptions. So this is a phenomenal safety duo they have. Tad concerned at what they have at corner, but I think what they have up front in their front 6 and 7 is certainly going to shelter them enough, because they're going to play some tough physical football. So I don't think it's going to be a major issue for them. But there's at times where they're going to see some pretty absurd talent that they didn't see last year, and it could certainly lead to some concerns. But I guess when they play TCU and Oklahoma, those are offenses that can really run it up, and they held them in check for the most part. 28 for the Sooners, 34 for TCU. Some highly effective scoring offenses. I mean, even in the last game of the year, those two teams combined had scored for over 100 points. So those are some high-flying offenses early on in the year they were able to take care of.
This is a part of the defense that does worry me. The secondary has some question marks. There are some solid pieces here. Isaiah Nwokpa is a good player for this team. 61 total tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, a sack, plus 4 picks, including 2 pick sixes in there, 3 pass breakups. Jonathan McGill, 9 pass breakups for him, a pick, 55 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, a really good coverage assets. Ahmad Moses is really solid, 46 total tackles for him. Kale Sanders had 7 pass breakups, 31 total tackles, plus a pick. Davis Robinson is a solid piece, 19 total tackles, 2 pass breakups, plus a pick. And then Jahari Rogers was not great, but he had a pick and 19 total tackles. The secondary unit, I think, is the weakest part of this team right now. It worries me a little bit, but I do think they get some nice, important starters back, and they can find a way to adjust and grow with that.
Looking at the verdict for the Mustangs defense, again, for a couple of years in a row, I previewed this team, and I was just impressed with what they were going to continue to do in terms of progression on this side of the ball. And they were borderline elite last year. They dominated the conference at all levels. And like I said, against those Power 5 teams, they looked fairly good. Mustangs now join a much tougher conference. Will certainly play good versus lower. They're going to play good versus those lower tier opponents. Likely to be strong versus the tougher offense as well. It remains to be seen. I think overall this is a defense that can really compete against most opponents. Look at the final prediction. The Mustangs are well equipped to do damage in this new conference, but I still think they will struggle good bit versus the better teams in this conference. Even though the offense is very deep, they have a good coach. The defense has schemed up a lot of nightmares for opponents. I think they will certainly be a team that a lot of people will predict the score a few upsets this season and can be capable of doing that, but I don't see them sparking enough offense in those games to do so. And I certainly think we need to hold the trigger on them. It's always, a trap, Nick. It's exciting. A veteran quarterback, all these receivers, all these running backs coming back. And it doesn't always translate to the success you think it should have, especially in a new conference. If they're still in the AAC, they'd probably, with flying colors, be the representative in the playoff. But now they're going to take up this bump in competition. First 3 weeks, I think they're going to take care of business. Might even beat TCU to start 4-0, but then you're starting to see the big dogs. People are going to pick them to beat FSU in an upset, Nick, even though I'm not all that high on the Noles. Don't think it's going to happen. I think they're going to get shut down immensely in that one. Interesting road games at Stanford and Duke. Overall, the rest of the schedule, though, fairly simple. I know you have them beating Virginia. I think they're going to call off guard in that one. 8-4 for me. Maybe that's a little bit disrespectful, but I'm also respecting the conference they're joining. I'm not just going to come out here and pick this Group of 5 team to completely come and shut up some of these guys last year. That includes 2 teams that were in the conference championship game in Charlotte.
And this is a very strong team that I think can rattle off 6 wins to wrap up the season. I think they will struggle against Louisville and Florida State, 2 of the better teams in this conference. I think they'll lose TCU as well. It's a very interesting matchup. The game at Nevada week 1, very interesting game to take a look at. Or week 0, that is a very interesting game to take a look at there. I think that's a team that, Nevada that has some potential to be okay this year. The spread is pretty lofty in that game, but I do think SMU can find a way to cover that game. You and I have been talking about that game heading as we get closer to college football returning on August 24th. That's a very interesting game when you take a look at that in the terms of the earlier slates as college football kicks back off out there heading out west. I do think the rest of the schedule is not too difficult, right? At Stanford, at Duke, at hosting Pitt, hosting BC and Cal are all easy wins in my opinion. I do think they'll beat Virginia as well on the road, with a team that I'm not very high on. They return a lot on offense. They return a lot on defense. The offense should be very strong this year, put up a ton of points, potentially 40 points per game type of offense. I really like what they have at quarterback. The receiving room is very deep. Running back room is solid. Offensive line, had some question marks, but I do think it's still a good unit. The defense, the secondary worries me, but I think the front part of the defense is phenomenally strong and can really adjust well to this conference. I have high hopes for this SMU team. The schedule's pretty straightforward, not too difficult. Wouldn't shock me this team goes out on a run and absolute tears through this new conference. We saw them win the conference last year in the Group of 5 level. I think they're more than capable to jump up to the Power 4 level and dominate.
Now, I certainly think if they do beat FSU in Louisville, they're probably going to be in the driver's seat looking at the remainder of the schedule, Nick. Pretty unlikely. 0-2 in those games for me. I don't think they'll be able to really compete. I think they'll probably lose those by double figures. But, man, if they do that, then, wow, we have something interesting on our hands, most certainly.
Yeah, if they can figure out a way to knock off, let's say they knock off TCU, head into Florida State at home 4-0 and win that game, then knock off Louisville a week later up there in Kentucky, they find themselves 6-0 with a schedule that has a clean walk to the college football playoff if you really look at it. Even if you do have a disappointing loss in there to Virginia or Pitt, something like that, they could still find their way into the playoff at 11-1. I think this team has a nice pathway. It's going to be tough. I think it's going to be tough to beat Florida State and Louisville, but if they can find a way to do so, they could really put themselves in a great position to bring really strong postseason football to the Dallas area.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very good pathway, like you mentioned. Speaking for today's episode, Nick, this will be a very fun team to watch this season. I think most people, including us, will look for them to exceed expectations. Final thoughts.
Excited to see this team play. Saw him play in person last year. Thought it was a really nice. I spoke to Rhett last year. Thought he was a fantastic young coach, a guy that's really nice, down-to-earth guy that's leading a really strong program here. They transitioned to the ACC in the best position of the new teams joining the conference to succeed from day one. I really like what they have, and I'm excited to see how they fare in this jump up in competition.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.